Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, host of Operation GCD, not the vice president. Welcome back for another Fridaze, along with my co-host, Nick, of the Occult Rejects. Nick, how you doing, sir?
What's going on, sir? How are you?
Doing well, doing well. We got a fun-filled discussion on some updates of our ongoing series of the Idaho 4 case here tonight with our other compadre in that series here, Ron from Wicked Planet. Ron from New England, host of the Wicked Planet. Ron, how you doing, sir?
Good, guys. What's happening?
Doing well, doing well. Been a while. We haven't convened on an Idaho topic in a long time, have we?
I've had people ask about it too recently, just in the last 2 weeks.
A lot of activity in the last 2 weeks. I understand. Yeah, a lot of ins and a lot of outs in the case going on. Couple what have yous.
Yeah, it kind of went quiet for a while, right? And then, we weren't hearing a lot about it. And then, of course, now you're getting lots of these little mini docs popping up on Hulu and I think on Netflix and things like that. And I think that they just do that to kind of poison the minds of the people that might have an idea that Kohberger maybe didn't do this. I mean, I know, because they obviously want people to think that Kohberger definitely did this. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So because it takes the heat off of other people that were involved. I know in the first, 4 or 5 parts that we did, I had that pretty much gut feeling that Kohberger wasn't guilty of this, but I don't know. The more I think about it and the more that I look into it, I don't think if he is involved, he wasn't involved by himself. But the fact remains, there's a serious lack of hard evidence. Serious lack of hard evidence.
I would agree with you on that, and not to correct you there, Ron, but I believe we've done 7 parts in that Idaho series, you, myself, and Nick. So, highly recommend folks check that out. Not in some extensive series for sure, but no, I understand what you're saying with the propaganda machine. It's pretty. I mean, it's a big effort, right? It's a big effort. But here, where I fall into my just general analysis of the case is where I've kind of remains the same. Is the state has failed to connect the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator in this case, Kohberger, the suspect they have in custody and trying for the crimes, for the murders. They have failed to connect Kohberger to the nexus point of a murder weapon, the victims, or the scene. So, that's a real tough case to prove. That's why they're going through these monumental efforts of propaganda, which in part did cause the case to be moved to a different county, right?
Yeah, it was moved to Latah County, wasn't it?
Well, it was moved from Latah down to Boise, which is 4 hours away.
That's what it was. It's been moved to Boise. Yeah, I'm right.
Yeah, it's a good distance. It's not the same people, but I don't know. I've kind of said this before. I don't know you can find a country in the earth, let alone a state or county in Idaho. In the United States or a county in Idaho, where the jury pool hasn't been tainted in this case.
Yeah, for sure. There was a point I wanted to make about that. It's really interesting how, and I know that we've talked about this before, but how, and we could just kind of hit on this a little bit before we get into the text messages and stuff, but in the motions filed from Ann Taylor, his lawyer, but it still comes down to the one question for me is, what was his motive? I mean, really, what was his motive? Because he has no connection to these kids.
Right.
And the motive that they're saying is he's just an obsessed person. He was as obsessed with BTK killer. He's studying serial killers, in school or whatever he's doing. But I still don't think that's a motive. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, isn't that part of the whole thing? Well, there has to be a motive. What's the motive? And to this point, I don't see a motive. Do you guys?
I would say, Nick, what are your thoughts on the motive?
I know, it's something I've thought about just recently. I was like, unless they're going with Scylla, I mean, I guess I can see you being obsessive, over one of the chicks. But I was thinking about, I was like, did we ever get a reason why this ever happened besides him might have being interested in one of the girls there? Like, what's the reason for killing everybody?
Right. It's all so the point you're bringing up about this whole stalking narrative that was perpetrated and inferred through court filings and affidavits with these notions that he was in the house around the house 12 times due to cell phone tracking data, right? That's then the media ran with these narratives that he was stalking him, sliding into his DMs on, into their DMs on Instagram, right? But that's all falling apart, right? And I think some of the reason why, this whole case is falling apart is why we're seeing some sort of releases from the state and, certainly from the new judge trying to appear, objective by separating himself from the secrecy of the case, because this case has an unprecedented level of secrecy involved, right? Which is unheard of. So on top of having no motive, no weapon, no nexus point of the suspect to the victims, they don't have, they really just don't have jack shit in my opinion, but they really don't have a motive, to fall back to. That was the motive they were relying on, the stalking motive. And I would be remiss without pointing out that Twiz, who often frequents our chat and is a moderator over at Kane B's The Purge, where I've been frequently talking about this case, has drawn some maps with the own cell phone data that the state's produced and the alibi that Koberger said he was at that park, and shows how the only exit out of that park that Koberger would have used would have been the south entrance to that park that he was allegedly at in Washington State, 20 some odd miles away from Moscow. Well, according to the cell phone data, if you go the only way out of that park to the south, you're going to use that cell phone area in Lewiston where they claim he was using, right? So it seems, even by their own data, their the cell phone business, that it proves that Koberger was nowhere near Moscow.
So JJ, they were able to, because remember, one of his, even in the news, they're saying, that it's kind of a half-ass alibi. But did they actually come out and release the cell phone tracking data when he said he was out basically stargazing and that he was in an area that didn't have service?
No, they haven't released that, but what maybe they have. So, because it's all the stuff we're seeing now has been known about for years within the sealed nature of this case, right, between both councils and parties and whatnot, and the judges, and whoever else has their prying eyes into that information. But no, they haven't released the full spectrum of all that cell phone stuff. In fact, the court is playing games with even getting Koberger's cell phone expert, in court. There was a fight. He was going to be testifying in an upcoming hearing. There was a fight that he's not allowed to testify. And then they kind of settled that he can file a declaration, basically, it's like an affidavit, but not sworn. And then they can read that in court, and he can be on a video teleconference if they need to ask him any questions.
Right.
So these are the games they play with this stuff still.
Yeah. Well, the cell phone data, the tracking data would show that if his alibi was legit, then his car wouldn't be the one that they picked up on the camera.
Right. Well, that's what I'm. Well. First of all, let's talk about that while you bring that up. The camera, and I'm glad you said camera and not cameras. The camera that they have, the car that they used to identify the allegedly Koberger's car, is one camera approximately half a mile away from the crime scene. Right. So they're not even using a camera anywhere near that house, and despite there being clear signs of cameras in and around that house. You know what I mean? Reports of there being a Ring doorbell camera on the murder home by the victim's sister, right? Take it for what you will. It's what, these are the reports. That video is not being used. There's the home directly in front of the house where they have the camera sitting on the light. It's like one of those drop-down cameras, you screwing like a light bulb type of deal. That's sitting there. They're not using that, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, to identify this vehicle, they have better, seemingly would have better images. So I maintain still that my position from the beginning, they've taken various disparate images of white vehicles driving around Moscow and Pullman in and around the early morning hours and said, look, this is our guy.
Yeah, something else I found too, because of the lack of cameras around this house, or cameras that weren't working or whatever, we know that, well, we don't know, but there was a lot of talk about how this was a known drug house. And do you think that because it was a known drug house, and if the fraternities and the sororities, or even some elements of the police department were involved in the drug trafficking, that they would want to make sure that there weren't any cameras around this house? Because if there was
100%.
If it was any cameras around this house, we would have so much more footage than what we have. And they're not even talking about footage. They're not showing any footage of anything around this house.
Right.
And it's
you're spot on. You're spot on, Ron. You're spot on.
Yeah, they want to make sure that they're not taping people coming and going, because if there ever was some form of drug crime there, they could just deny it. They'd be like, "Oh no. Well, we got it on camera. We got it on camera right here." But they don't have to worry about that because they don't have any cameras. And that's why they can't pinpoint Kohberger to being around that house, because they've got no cameras to prove that he was.
Well, I see what you're saying. They know, just to be clear, though, they definitely have cameras, but law enforcement is, for the reasons you identified of why they don't want to show footage in and around the scene or the circumstances, because it would yield the actual results of what's going on here, right? So they have to play a magic show with using one camera from around the corner at one specific time and a disparate amount of other white cars that may or may not even be the same car, may or may not be white. But the reason why we don't see footage around the house, from my perspective, is because there are cameras. It's demonstrable. And again, even the victim's sibling has claimed that she checked the Ring doorbell camera. Well, the murder home is a Ring doorbell camera. What are we talking about here? Why is that? Why is all of that footage not mentioned, or any of that footage mentioned, et cetera, used in the, discerning the circumstances of this crime? But yeah, they don't want folks to see that because they'd understand what the fuck went on there, right? I mean, that's why they're like, hey, we'll use that camera around the corner and we'll just be like, yeah, it's Kohberger's car. We promise.
Yeah, it's just the longer that this goes, it does look better for Kohberger the longer this goes, and that's why I'm thinking they were trying to jam it in the beginning, right? So now they're saying that it's not even it's gonna go to trial like in April at sometime in April, right?
August.
Well, I thought they said April, but they weren't thinking it was going to be done till August.
I think they have hearings in April, but I don't believe the
trial
is till August. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
but they're still pushing the death penalty.
Of course, they got the, they can't back up. They can't drop this. They've hammered themselves into Kohberger as the guy. They've hammered themselves into the timeline of very, very, as time goes on and more information is even made public. So behind the scenes, I'm quite confident Ann Taylor and other counsel there are very, very aware that this timeline that the state's pushing is completely bullshit. Because the more information we're getting with all these text messages and other activity of the roommates who were allegedly at the sleep, right? Frozen shock phase, asleep and shit at the beginning. The more information is known publicly that Ann Taylor and crew has known for a very long time, years likely at this point, is this timeline is absolute bullshit. They're trying to say happened, right? So yeah, I mean they forced themselves into the corner, and they're can't do much about it at this point. But I'm glad you brought the cameras. So in regards to the cameras, were you all familiar back at the early? Let's take a trip back to the blast from the past here, back to December of 2022, right? Idaho murders investigators traveled at least 24 miles to collect surveillance video related to the killings, right? That's a town east of Moscow. They use the state route. On doing that travel, they drove right, if y'all remember this one, they drove right past this gas station, 802 Taylor Road. And this is the gas station that a week after the call for help with the White Elantra on December 7th, the night manager here, called it in and said, hey, I went through my video. There's a car coming past here, white car. It could be your car, 3:45 in the morning or whatever it was, the hours in which they were asked to look at their, for help from the law enforcement. And then law enforcement in their response came over here and taped everything off, shut the whole store down for the day. Despite the car driving past this gas station a month prior and never stopping, they're like, we got to shut this place down. We got to tape it off. Right. but it proves that they drove 24 miles out of town to go check some cameras while not checking the surveillance footage for this one. Even a month later, when the employee brings it to their attention, there's retribution. They shut the place down for a day. You know what I mean? So they didn't give a shit about actual camera. Look, they put a sign on the door. They said, "Look, shut it down." You know, this was December 15th. So I don't think they cared about cameras, Ron. You know what I mean? They're playing games with these cameras.
Yeah, they this park that they're talking about that Koberger went to, was this on the route past this gas station?
Opposite direction.
Okay.
Opposite direction. That gas station is kind of northeasterly, and the park's southwesterly over in Washington. I'll bring it up on a map, show you here. Give me one moment, please. So, Nick, you were bringing up another point besides some of this camera stuff. What was the point you were bringing up about the lack of evidence, right? If Koberger were wishing to dispute a lot of these factors, there's really nothing he can go prove.
There's no bodies and there's no house anymore. They took down the house and all the bodies. I didn't know until you told me. All the bodies have been cremated. Man, it's crazy.
Right.
All four bodies.
So
that's the odds. I mean, I know cremation is probably more popular than usual, but the odds, 4 people just randomly decided to get their kids cremated.
I would argue that it's less likely for their age group, just for I lost numerous friends of that in that age era, right? So I just remember it being a major factor, like folks wanting to have an open casket in those kind of circumstances. I don't know, maybe that's just from my perspective, but
well, here's my perspective on this. We're talking a multiple capital murder case. They should have kept those bodies in a morgue, temperature controlled,
exactly,
where they wouldn't deteriorate, and kept them bodies for evidence.
Absolutely. Especially when the coroners make conflicting statements of herself and have reports that conflict, right?
Yeah, we can get into that. But I mean, the bodies that, like Nick says, the bodies are the evidence. Now the evidence, like it can't even be exhumed now. You know how sometimes somebody's, they got a funeral, they bury them, and they're like, oh, well, we've got some new information. We're going to get a court order, and we're going to exhume these bodies, and we're going to take another look. Right? That
happens a lot.
That option's gone.
That option's go back to the house either.
Yeah. And exactly. So the first mind-blowing part of it isn't really the cremation of the bodies, although that is mind-blowing. They got rid of the house.
Right. Well,
I still don't understand how they could do that. That is the murder scene. We talked about this on past shows. I mean, they've got to be able to have access to the murder scene for a jury pool. I mean, it's standard practice. I just don't understand how they could do that.
Well, it gets way worse than that because they didn't just.
Well, they've gotten rid of all the evidence.
My butt.
They've gotten rid of any evidence.
No, they don't have any evidence.
Well, this is what I'm saying. Let's just say they've gotten rid of anything that Koberger can use to prove that he didn't do it.
Right.
Even though it's not up to him to prove that he didn't do it, it's up to them to prove that he did do it. But that's not really how the justice system works anymore, is it?
It's not. But I agree with you. They got rid of the evidence, and it does seem kind of gruesome, maybe perhaps by saying that they should have kept the bodies. But it's quadruple, homicide, capital murder case. This man's facing the death penalty. He has the right for his investigators and his counsel to go in and ensure that the work was done properly in these autopsies in the coroner, and these wounds match the alleged weapon that they claim that it's matching, which by the coroner's own statements, that doesn't appear to be the case. And other conflicting statements. Besides the alleged time of death, she had to later walk back. She claims, this is her own report, Ron, issued on November 17th. She claimed 2022. She claimed the date of pronounced death, 11/13/2022 at noon. she, by her own admission, did not get into the house until after 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell did she declare them dead at noon?
That's impressive.
Yeah. And then
she's a fucking time traveler.
Well, they went to put them on the phone and they're like, they won't say anything. She's like, they must be dead. They called her from the fucking office.
They didn't answer their text messages.
Yeah.
Not only that, but the whole thing, was it light or dark out at the time? And was it a coroner's van or not a coroner's van at the scene? Sunset was at 4:16. She was saying she was there at 5:30, and in the pictures it's light out still. Okay, so that's bullshit right there.
Yep. So, and everyone wants to say this is the coroner's van. Everyone on the interwebs has seen videos and posts this truck van here. I found a whole collection of photographs. It's
that's
quite
a trailer.
Nice.
That's a tag along.
It's a trailer, and you can see in the inside of it that ain't no coroner's van. But everyone who wants to claim there's a coroner's van on scene, they posted this picture of this truck and this trailer, and you can see that is not a coroner's van.
And it's daylight.
And it's daylight. You're right. Yes, sir.
You know,
so these are all good questions. These are all very good questions.
Well, let's go back to the chat. Heather says, "What about these purchases? What about these purchases? With DM's purchase at TJ Maxx? Yeah, one of the state's exhibits is DM purchase at TJ Maxx. What is Heather talking about there? And another roommate's Alta purchase."
Yes, Heather's correct. She has a large volume of details in this case, and she's clearly read the documents and seen the search warrant request for such inane things that have nothing to do with the case, such as TJ Maxx and Alta purchases. Correct. This is all part of the magic show, Ron. In order to make the appearance of an investigation, you must have files and exhibits and attempts to obtain information in that investigatory record and documents. So if you're not going to actually conduct an investigation, you start sending out search warrants for a lot of inane bullshit things like, hey, what did this person buy at TJ Maxx last year? A victim, surviving roommate, nonetheless. A victim by all media accounts. Now, do you all have a different opinion on these things? Do you see what I'm saying? They don't seem to have any relevant purpose to the investigation, right?
Yeah. That's weird.
What is Alta? Heather said that too.
I think it's a makeup situation, maybe some cosmetics, perhaps.
Yep.
So they're trying to tie in purchases that other people made. At straws. Yeah, in the chat, everybody's kind of saying, getting rid of the house. I mean, that's.
Well, but let's get back to that notion while we're on that topic again. So if you look at how the house was handled from moment one, you'll see that there was no. I'm an advocate for keeping the home for the jury to walk through to see the nonsense, right? To see the DM story, the narrative that's being perpetrated in these 911 calls and the release of text message transcripts, etc. Even the most recent narrative that they've now shifted to with the surviving roommates. DM running downstairs would have been running right past Xana Kernodle's body. Xana Kernodle would have been bleeding everywhere in these 911 call responses. This is, again, according to their records, as she would lay in the hallway. But nonetheless, by the time that Ann Taylor gets around on December 30th, law enforcement's already walked up in the scene for weeks without it. This is November 13th, without any sort of gloves on, without any booties on their boots, right? And they continue to do that for weeks. So by the time Ann Taylor gets on the scene on December 30th, that's the first order of business she does. They literally have an abatement team over there waiting to clean out the house. And she files a motion that the 9:30 that morning, the same time she files a motion to represent Koberger, she files a motion to stop the destruction of the home. And they literally had a team inside the home at 9:30 that morning as she's filing that motion. So she's done what she could. By that point in time, when she came around, I mean, it was, to be quite honest with you, it was already destroyed, right? This is pictures of the team on December 30th, right in front of the home when she's filing that motion. This shit's out of here. They wanted this home gone so bad. But again, it gets back to what forensic value was the home left at that point other than maybe walking the jury through. And to that extent. I believe they did some videoing and 3D modeling in there for that.
You remember I looked
don't
into
agree
the
with it, but-
disaster response company?
Have I?
No, I said, do you remember when we did that? I did look into that, and it seemed weird.
Yeah.
It was all the companies were on this property with a lake with no building.
Oh, that's the response company,
Yeah,
Nick?
Yeah, because I was like, yo, what's up with the people that even showed up for that shit? I looked into that. That stuff.
With the mailbox was out in a field in Colorado or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was multiple businesses there, right?
Yes, for him. Yeah, same owner.
Right. So I'll tell you, gents, one thing that really bothers me, again, there's no evidence for Koberger to dispute any of these claims by the state. Again, it's very in this normal procedure to have your defense be able to even do second autopsies if they want to, right? For the defense argument against whatever the state's claims are with how these homicides occurred, because we can continue to demonstrate time after time the state's been bullshitting everybody and how these things occurred. I'm open to a lot of situations of what actually went down here when it went down, but one of the things that I know for a fact that seems to be more and more of a factor is the continued obfuscation of details in around this Greek community, right? What regarding these Snapchat messages that were released, right? It's long rumored from the beginning that all these Greek students were Snapchatting each other in these messages as early as, my understanding, early as 9. They're claiming now 10, and then recently unsealed documents has evidence of the 10 a.m. Snapchats. However, there's Snapchats earlier that morning around, I believe, 5 or 4:30, I believe. So as early as that. So who knows when these things started? I'm willing to believe they were Snapchatting all night for because these surviving roommates were never asleep. But it seems to be more and more this complicity of activity surrounding the Greek culture. And one thing that I found interesting that I did not know when I'll take y'all back down a trip down memory lane here. So this is a photograph from the December 7th shopping spree by Police Chief James Fry, when he announced to the world that he was clueless in his investigation and needed assistance looking for a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra on December 7th, 2022. And then he drove a U-Haul right after that. Drove a U-Haul over to the murder scene, started emptying the entire place out. One of the contents of being emptied out here that day, they wore gloves at least, but no booties on their shoes. One of the items is this piece of luggage here from flown in GEGs up there in Spokane Airport. That's the airport code. And it says Steve Gonzalez on it, right? And I was like, well, that's odd. And I was like, why is the tag with, it's like he flew there and left it there, right? And I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it could happen, right? And then I realized, oh wait, Kaylee Gonzalez had an older brother. His name's also Steve number 3, right? His father's Steve Jr., he's Steve number 3. He was a year ahead of her in Moscow. He's also a member of a fraternity, the same fraternity as Caden Young, the fellow that got that hot shot dose there in March of 2023, the former fraternity president for that fraternity. I had no idea that Kaylee Gonzalez's older brother was a senior there as well. For some reason, he started a year before, but per his own LinkedIn, he graduated in 2023 like she would have, or they gave her a diploma to her family for it. But nonetheless, so he was a year ahead of her, a year older, but they were seniors at the same time, and he was at a fraternity there. Again, Caden Young's fraternity, right? So it seems to me like, where was he in the mix, right? No one really discusses all these other aspects of these victims' families that are right there in the same town, right? You got Zader Cornettles.
Yeah, never heard of any of that.
Right? You remember Caden Young?
No.
So Caden Young was the fella on it was March 21st, 2023, March 22nd, 2023. He went to was in Seattle and got apparently on spring break, got a hot shot dose of fentanyl laced cocaine to Moscow drug dealers, right?
Oh yes,
Demetrius Robinson and Emma Bailey, right?
Yeah,
and they later had their charges dropped despite being arrested for supplying this hot shot. But anyway, that dude was the former he had recently resigned as president earlier in the school year from that same fraternity, and that's the same fraternity that Kaylee's older brother was in as a senior. So where's he in the mix of all these activities that weekend? You have the Chapin triplets that their cars are later cordoned off, right? And ostensibly part of the crime scene. Although I would argue that may not be the case. But they had 2 vehicles parked at the house. They're never in any narratives.
No, you don't hear about any of that stuff. Again, more information that's being suppressed. Like even being suppressed in the news because you have to dig that up yourselves. I wanted to ask Heather, who is the alternative perp that they're talking about? What is that information? Because I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I'm sure Heather will share that with us here. I don't know. I just think that it's an interesting dynamic. So you have Xander Kernodle's sister is over on Washington State University. She's also in a sorority over there. She was a senior. You have the Chapin triplets, Ethan being a victim and his brother and sister being, I believe his brother's there, part of Sigma Chi, and his sister was one of the sororities there in U of I, Idaho, University of Idaho. I don't know. And again, their vehicles are at the house, right? The Chapin's vehicles are at the home. And there's really never been a discussion of where they were, why their vehicles were there. I know it's been inferred that their vehicles were there due to a party the previous night. And I have a lot of questions about that party. You know what I mean? A lot of questions. For example, do y'all recall why Kaylee Gonzalez was back on campus to begin with? Remember that she had left campus. She was invited back to go to a party as Dylan Mortensen's +1 at a Phi Beta Pi, right? Because all the other girls in the home were Phi Beta Pi, but Kaylee Gonzalez was not, right? And I don't know if y'all remember this stuff early on.
Well, yeah. Well, wasn't she? She just came back for that weekend, right? Is this
right.
The same thing you're talking about? Yeah,
that's correct. So this is a picture posted to Dylan Mortensen's, was called a VSCO account. It was wiped clean on or about December 8th here. This is it being wiped clean. These pictures I downloaded on or about November 25th, 2022. I just downloaded all the pictures on the account before they got scrubbed because there was postings in around the murder time. I'm like, well, that's interesting. So this one was posted November 12th at 9 p.m. So ostensibly, so the date and time of this stamp here, according to this app, this photo video editor app, VSCO, says that it deletes your metadata from the picture, and this is the date and time in which you post this picture and the time zone in which you post it. So take that for what you will. There's a lot of dispute about these things over these photographs, I believe, but my understanding, and again, per the website, the manufacturer of the app, that's how it works. So this would have been 9 p.m. on Saturday night is when this was posted, right? So, but allegedly there was a party on Friday night. So I actually questioned, what was this party? Did it go on Friday night or did it go on Saturday night, right?
These are also, well, because Saturday night it was the Saturday night that they were filmed by the food truck, right?
So that's at 1:30 in the morning. So we know at 1:30 in the morning, they're no longer dressed up to go out for any kind of party, but they may or may not have gone. We're told that for example, Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez, who were at the food truck at 1:30 in the morning, were told that they were at the Corner Club bar from 10 p.m. to 1:30 in the morning. Right?
All right. But my point is, if this photo had to be from the night before, because they're not going to get all dressed up and dolled up like this and then run home and put on the shabbiest clothes and not have any of their makeup on or anything like that. I mean, it's just they looked different if this was a Friday night photo versus how they looked in any of the surveillance
from
the food truck.
Yeah,
they looked like they just threw on whatever, dressed like slobs, and went out for a bunch of drinks. I mean, that's just what it looked like to me.
And I'm willing to believe that narrative. That is the narrative we're told, right? But so then it begs, this is where they're supposed to be. So 10 to 1:30, they're at the Corner Club. Kaylee and Maddie at the food truck at 1:30. Kaylee and Maddie home at 1:45, even though that's later changed to 1:56 because of Kaylee's sister, correcting the law enforcement's timeline here. Then we play the game with Ethan and Zaina, where they claim Ethan and Zaina was at the Sigma Chi party from 8 to 9. But then from 9 to 1:45 became an ongoing mystery that's never really been concluded, of where the law enforcement kept asking people, help us find where these folks were at, right? during these hours, right? So we're never told where Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk were. We're told they were out on the town separately from the other roommates, and they arrived home at 1 a.m. So this is why I question the events of what happened on that night and what kind of party any of these kids were at, or young adults. For example, Zaina, Maddie had already quit their sororities, right? Earlier in the school year, confirmed through photographs and statements by the sororities. Kaylee seemingly had a fractioned relations with her sorority because she's living with Phi Beta Pi sisters and leaving school early and graduating. And when she's coming back, she's going to a Phi Beta Pi party, not her own sorority, right? As the story goes, she's Dylan Mortensen's +1 to this Phi Beta Pi party. So how are these other girls who already quit Phi Beta Pi, how are they going to the party? Ethan Chapin's allegedly suspended from Sigma Chi. How's he going to a Sigma Chi party that night, along with his girlfriend who also quit her sorority, Zaina, right? That's what I'm saying. If these folks are quitting their sororities and fraternities, suspended or quit, they're not going to be allowed at these parties.
Right.
So I question. This is why I'm bringing this up, because I just question all of the activities that Friday and Saturday night. Because again, Kaylee Gonzalez seems to be lured back into this environment under the pretenses of this party.
So there's a gap. There's a gap in all those timelines.
Right.
There's a couple hour gap, and if all these, and do we know if all the cell phone records from everybody involved in this were like subpoenaed or anything like that? Because it would say, this person texts this person, one of the people that's been missing for 2 hours. You know what I mean? It's like they can actually coordinate all that cell phone information from everybody that's involved in this case, including all the people that are dead and the people that are not dead. And,
right.
And they can put a whole map together of exactly where everybody was and what time they were. You know what I mean? And
100%.
That would clear up that puzzle part of it. Because, I think it matters if we're trying to figure out when the actual time of the attack was, because right now still that's up for question. The actual time.
You're right. You are correct, sir. And as far as I'm concerned, their narrative and timelines are all up for question. So, but you're spot on. So I'll just give you an idea of where my thoughts are, and y'all can obviously share yours as well here. But as far as where the cops are in any of these things, right? Law enforcement is out to lunch, and they're out to lunch intentionally. So here's a headline from back in January of 2023, right? This is a day after Kohberger's been extradited to Idaho. Cops puzzled by 8-hour window before Idaho murder victims' roommates called 911. Well, we just learned this week with the release of Ann Taylor's motion, listing a whole flurry of other cell phone activity that is clearly still being, censored and tailored, not Ann-tailored, but tailored as far as they're not releasing all of the information. They've known the entire time these girls were never sleeping. They've known the entire time about these Snapchat group messages, phone calls to parents, phone calls to Lord of mercy, who knows, because there's a lot of calls, you know what I mean? So when the cops were pushing, this was law enforcement's position starting in around, mid-December, they're in December, and they maintained it through the arrest of Kohberger that these girls were sleeping. And these are the matters that Ann Taylor's pushing in court, saying in that motion she filed, saying she's citing this. They said they were sleeping, and this is clearly not them sleeping. And y'all let them say it. You know what I mean? So it's just, at some point in time, we have to everyone wants to scrutinize the activities and actions of Brian Kohberger's cell phone data or he claiming he's got a bad alibi or whatever else. But, and I'm not saying you fellas are, because we've obviously questioned these surviving roommates, but no one questions these, there's no scrutiny from the mainstream media at all with these activities and actions of these roommates, despite the blowing up of the frozen shock phase, 8 hours sleeping narratives, right?
Okay, so we know that that's bullshit, because we have unbelievable amount of messaging, text messaging going on, everything from Snapchat to Instagram to this other social media that I've never heard of before. And Yik Yak, yeah. So they're on Yik Yak, they're on TikTok. And I mean, this is every couple of minutes.
It's essentially nonstop. There's a 1 hour or so gap or so, but it's essentially nonstop if you ask me.
So from, what is it, 210? From 210 all the way to, might as well say, noontime the next day.
Yeah.
It's constant. There's one here where there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 text messages, actually 7 text messages, all within 1 minute. I mean, at 11 o'clock, 11:51 the next day. And that's just, I mean, it's nonstop here. So
and that's what they're telling us right now, right?
Well,
that's
I don't
what they're
understand.
telling us right now, right?
And this is the stuff that Ann Taylor wants to make sure that people know about. Correct? Am I correct when I say it like that?
Right. The state's been trying to exclude it under some nonsense of excited utterance law, saying these were statements made in excited utterance and therefore not admissible in the court. Which things made under excited utterance are that these are planned, calculated, and orchestrated events of these young adults communicating and bullshitting for 8 hours. You know what I mean? And again, it's not all their fault because law enforcement looked the other way, right? So then you have to look at why is law enforcement aiding and abetting this nonsense with their own narratives of the frozen shock face, right? Written in a sworn affidavit by Brett Payne, or the 8 hour you're sleeping, also written in that sworn affidavit, right? Why are they committing perjury in order to protect these young girls, right?
Yeah, I just don't know how any of them can be sleeping with that many text messages and calls. Come on. It says here in the chat that Yik Yak only works in a 5-mile radius.
Right.
Must be
it's like an
thing. Yeah.
It's like it's my understanding. If you're friends with someone on Snapchat and you log into Snapchat and they're in your region, like it'll show you all your nearby. Yickety Yak here is like an anonymous version of that function. So you don't have to have a login. Anyone can just kind of open up the app and see who's within a 5-mile radius. So it's an interesting aspect that she opened that up. What's more interesting to me is these Snapchat group messages, right? So this is something. So when this was something early on in the case that it was long rumored and whatnot, and they're finally admitting to it now. They're claiming 10. I was quite positive way earlier, but so this is, I'm just trying to paint the environment that clearly existed here the morning of these quote unquote discovery, because I don't think it was much of a discovery. Everyone knew, or at least a lot of the folks in authority knew what was going on there. It seems, but every student on campus, I mean, like to an extent, I think the Snapchat group messages did a great job in providing distractions and everything, because it disseminated so much so quickly all around campus and town before law enforcement was ever even contacted officially. I'm sure there's members of law enforcement that got word of this and they're like, what are you talking about? Because there's no official call yet, right? Folks that may not be in the know within the departments, right? Who are seemingly just hearing rumor all of a sudden spread like wildfires, but listening to their radios and seeing that there's no calls and being confused. I'm sure there was some of that. Because that's how quick this message grew around town. And I say that to also say that paint that environment, to paint this environment. No one's talking about that shit today, despite we now have proof that it did in fact occur with these Snapchat.
Yeah, it's like everybody in the whole neighborhood knew something was going on except the cops.
Yep. I think some. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the cops knew, but I know what you mean. But then no one's talking about it, right?
I mean, nothing was official. There was no call. I mean, now information is coming out about this 911 call. But what they're saying is everybody that was part of these Snapchat groups, or maybe this Yik Yak or whatever, they're all aware that something major just went down, but they don't call 911 till when?
Well, I agree with you on that assessment, Ron. I question whether or not folks did call 911. That's why I said, some of the law enforcement knew. So it's a good point. That's what I'm saying. Like, how is this an environment that existed, right? How does the entire town know? And to which point where at least elements of law enforcement would have been told of these messages or whatnot. That's how quickly it spread in the small town. And no one responds. There's no official response to this home till noon. despite these things going on, it seems as early as 10, but I would say more evidence, like 8 at least by the current record. I'm guessing more like all night people, this was going around the sororities and fraternities.
Remind me, JJ, what time did the cops actually get there?
Noon. 11:58 was the call, noon arrival. 11:56 by some accounts was the call, noon arrival. They're even conflicting on that. Brett Payne doesn't arrive till 4 o'clock. That's a great point, Ron. So I'm glad you said that. That's one of my biggest issues with this case. We now have information released, and we still do not understand the dynamics of the law enforcement's response to that home. We don't have the identities of the officers or in the order in which they arrived. These are all things that I would expect to have at this point in time with the release of information. We have none of it. What we do have is a media circus magic show, claiming that various different tales of how this went down and sworn affidavits claiming things such as Officer Smith and quote unquote other officers were the first on scene. Now we do have a guy, Howard Bloom. You remember that guy? Y'all remember him?
Howard Bloom?
Howard Bloom?
No.
He was a New York Times author, supposedly some, lauded author who wrote a series of articles beginning in January 2023 and published a book on the case, basically convicting Kohberger in June of 2024.
Yeah, didn't he write another book? Didn't he write the BTK book?
That may be true. I'm not sure about that. I can tell you his Kohberger book is full of nonsense and complete lies, one of which he claims that not to mention this book's written in a case that's got a gag order, right? This dude somehow writing a case to convict Kohberger and making claims such as, his dad knew on that, that drive across the United States. He writes in that book, Kohberger's dad knew that his son had done something, very, deviant or some nonsense like that. But in his book, he paints a different narrative of the first officers on scene. It's Officer Gunderson and other officers. So it's no longer Officer Smith and other officers in the affidavit. Bloom's painting a narrative with Officer Gunderson and other officers, right? The initial media reports was it was Captain Lanier and 4 rookie officers were the first on scene. So we don't even understand how the response happened. But yeah, it's
And do we know what information was released in discovery? Because Ann Taylor getting discovery from the prosecution would have the information of the police reports that have to be written out of who actually showed up to the crime scene first, who showed up after, they would have records of communications between the police and police departments and different governmental agencies. They would have all of that, but nobody has any of it.
They're playing so many games, Ron. So like last May in that hearing with Brett Payne about his affidavit, right? His affidavit of arrest. He's testified in the affidavit. He's seen videos and identifying this white car, right? In these videos, again, it's just a white car. They only use one camera. They've now admitted to actually, quote unquote, identifying the vehicle. But he's testifying. He's seen these videos, and those videos weren't in Ann Taylor's possession, despite the state telling her that they'd already given them to her. And then he's on the stand and says, "Oh, well, shoot, that's actually the federal evidence. So you're going to have to talk to the feds to get that evidence, right?" These are the games they're playing, Ron. It's still to this day.
Yeah, we knew there was a conflict between information that the feds had and what the local and state police had too, right?
Right. But just unpack that for a second, Ron. Right? Like you've gone through some. You've seen the wheels of justice, right? And even on the federal level, correct? Right?
Oh yeah.
So they have they've indicted. They clearly indicted. And they admitted it last May in this news article. I actually went back and found that was my assessment of the hearing. Was that they were clearly playing these games because there was a federal grand jury indictment. They tacitly admit it in the hearing, but in this article it says from May of 2024, it talks about it right here. State prosecutors in the University of Idaho student homicide case relied on a federal grand jury to obtain dozens of subpoenas to build a case against their suspects. So some of those were replicated by the state. Other ones seem to be playing games with whatever this indictment was, at whatever date it occurred, and whatever warrants that they actually got. We don't know these things still. So what I'm saying is you're familiar with it though. You can't indict somebody in a federal court and then indict them in the state court and then say we're going to use evidence from the federal court indictment even though we're not prosecuting them there, right? And we're not going to give you that evidence because that's a different court and a different indictment, even though we're doing it over in the state. Do you see what I'm saying? These kind of games are being played there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, they're not sharing information, or
it's not. It goes a little bit further than that, right? You know, if you have an indictment on the federal level and you have this evidence from that, and you're just kind of giving some of it to the state, but the state's saying you can't have that because that's not us. That's from that other indictment with those people, even though the prosecution is being done under the state.
Okay, so did the feds get involved because Kohberger was in Washington and it happened in Idaho? I mean, because what other reason would the feds have to be getting involved with this?
That's it. That's just it. They're not officially involved, right? They're an augmentee force in the Moscow ISP investigation of the crimes, right?
So how were they able to get a federal grand jury indictment?
It's a great question, Ron. I mean, I'm
sure
sense. It's not very difficult.
If they're not part of the investigation.
Well, again, they're not.
To me, interstate would be the only reason why the feds would be involved, unless there was some type of drug trafficking thing that the feds were aware of, which they wanted to get in there and find out what was going on. That'd be the only reason why the feds were involved.
Well, that or they're just flat out crooked. But yeah, on paper, you're right. You are correct, sir. So I think that was one of the reasons. One of the impetuses by letting him go back to Pennsylvania was to make it more legal on paper that the feds were so involved, because they didn't want to, you know, again, we're not sure when this federal indictment came down, but the idea that you can get evidence under a federal indictment and then use that evidence to prosecute someone in a state court by telling them you can't have discovery of that evidence, that's a different court. These are my problems. So it indicates the FBI was involved very early. I would argue for a moment one with this federal indictment.
Yeah, well, there's got to be a reason for that, because the feds are not going to get involved in a homicide case. It's just not going to happen unless this homicide case was on a federal level. I mean, maybe because 4 people got killed, maybe the feds got involved. I mean, I just don't understand why the feds are getting involved. We have that kind of stuff.
You're right. They have no jurisdiction. You're right.
We have that stuff that happens up here on the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border. Southern New Hampshire and Massachusetts should be, I mean, we should all be just one state, honestly. And these things go on, like the FBI doesn't get involved. New Hampshire State Police investigative units deal with the Massachusetts State Police investigative units. They deal back and forth. They don't involve the feds, even though it crossed state lines. And that was always the thing, that the federal government would get involved if it was an interstate kind of crime ring or something like that. Then they would get involved. But they don't even get involved in the, like we have the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts, the city of Lowell, big drug hubs. And we know that all the drugs that come to New Hampshire go through those cities. FBI doesn't get involved. It's all left between the New Hampshire's version of the DEA and the Massachusetts version of the DEA. I mean, they just work together on it. They don't even involve the feds.
You are making some fine points there, Ron.
It's just weird. I mean, maybe because Kohberger went back to Pennsylvania, now they can say, okay, so the feds can get involved. And wasn't it the feds that actually got the DNA sample from the neighbor's trash can?
Am I back?
Yeah,
you're back. Did you hear what I said?
I caught parts of that. Yeah, Ron, you're making some great points. And what you're identifying, in my opinion, is all part of the magic show. So we now know that the FBI...
Was it the feds that got the DNA sample from the neighbor's trash can in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, the feds are doing it all, Ron. They're the ones who identified the vehicle. They're the ones who done all the DNA nonsense. They're the ones who, brought him back to Idaho, on the manhunt. The manhunt they needed to have to make it look more legit of their involvement and make him look more guilty. They could have done all that in Washington, right?
Dude, I still say this comes down to major drug trafficking and human trafficking. I really do.
Think so?
I really do.
Yeah,
human trafficking. Yeah, and I think that those girls that got killed were involved in it. I really do. I think. I mean, why else would they quit school?
No argument here.
quit their sororities, and they got no lack of money, right? So they're able to party it up and have plenty of money to go do whatever they want. I still say this has a bigger, deeper, darker rabbit hole than just some guy freaks out and decides he's going to go kill 4 people one night. I mean, just
way deeper.
None of that has ever made sense. None of that has ever made sense to me.
Way deeper. Well, would you believe when Koberger left on December? I agree with DWS here. Ron's onto something. None of this makes sense, Ron. I agree with you there. And as far as the trafficking and drugs and human trafficking, again, that's my position. But in regards to Koberger and this FBI nonsense, would you believe that it's now demonstrated that the FBI knew his name before he even left campus, was circulating it to Moscow PD? This is before any kind of DNA identifications, any trash can nonsense. The feds are circulating his name to the Moscow PD before he leaves campus.
They already selected him. No. They already selected him.
I agree with you. Yes, sir. But why would you need to have a cross-nation manhunt if you've already know the guy's name before he leaves campus?
To make it look good.
Exactly.
The more time is now they say, oh well, he's acting weird. He's putting trash in his neighbor's thing. He's right. Walking around the house wearing gloves. And they're just trying to paint him out to be some psycho. And who knows? Probably is a psycho. Who knows? But I still there's still no motive, dude.
For all I know, Brian Koberger likes to Richard Gere type hobbies with gerbils and copper tubing, but regardless of the circumstances, that doesn't cause him to be a murderer. And again, the constitutional rights violations in this and the lack of justice for the families and these victims is this is monumental levels of absurdity, in my opinion. But I think a lot of it's done through this ongoing kind of magic show. And I'll take you all on a trip down memory lane here for a moment on something the Moscow PD aided and abetting this magic show through their bullshit of making statements in regards to things when they had no suspects and were asking the public for help. Actually, this is before that. This is November 24th. Cops probing link between the University of Idaho murders and similar Oregon stabbing. Do y'all remember that one?
No, I don't actually.
So this was a murder in Oregon that occurred with some couple that got a home invasion type stabbing situation 400 miles away 2 years prior, right? And this was something being rumored about, obviously, on the interweb. So back to you've made statements to me in the past, Nick, where I think you're onto something about this analysis of the true crime communities relative to these high profile cases and data collection of sorts, right? And evaluating people's responses. So this story was being circulated through like Reddits and stuff on the Idaho 4 murders. And then Moscow PD addresses it formally in a press conference, right? Before they cut off their full press conferences. They addressed that one in a different unsubstantiated rumor later, actually. But that, why even have a press conference addressing this conspiracy theory from, the interwebs regarding not a similar murder really whatsoever, other than the fact that it was a home invasion and stabbing that happened 400 miles away in a different state? Why would you even comment on it? Why would you even bring it up?
It's very similar too, isn't it? I mean, are we still forgetting that 2 of these girls' mothers are one mother, one stepmother, and all these drug charges? And the people that they ratted out, not some nice people.
I don't think anyone's forgetting that, Ron. No, I'm not. I'm certainly not.
So, who is this Randall Cole that Heather's talking about? As named as the other possible perp.
I don't know. Look, I'm behind on these comments here. He
goes by 2 different names. She said he goes by. Oh no, excuse me. She says he goes by Cole Randall on some social media platforms, but his name is Cole Brarenberg. That's a new one on me. I don't know anything about that. Obviously,
I don't know.
Into this big time.
I don't know about that, but you're right about all this drug stuff, and that's why I infer the feds were in there and involved in all this stuff way before possibly November 13th, 2022, and they had eyes on Koberger, and I can make a strong argument with their recent release or just with their search warrants for this knife situation with Koberger. the K-bar knife situation with Koberger. I mashed those together for a second. It was a very targeted situation, and it exhibits foreknowledge in the exact dates. They only requested 2 very specific timeframes, the state did, because they were replicating a process that federal grand jury was doing, which may not still clear the start date and if it even ended. So they could be getting more evidence right now through that process. It's still investigating Koberger. Who knows? But it seems the feds had clocked some activity with this. They're trying to paint this whole K-bar stuff in and around. I don't quite fully understand the magic show they're trying to perpetrate, because if he bought the knife, they wouldn't need a witness to confirm that he bought the knife. So that I'm still unclear about. But they're claiming he bought the knife and then later try to buy a new knife by clicking on things. So it's all very questionable. But nonetheless, the state search warrant indicates foreknowledge, from some source, which seems to be the previous federal grand jury situation. So it's hard to tell when these feds got there, but it's certainly drug related. And this statement, you heard of this guy, Jay Embry, makes a case for the Aryan Brotherhood, who the parents finked on. Parents got witness protection, I believe.
Yeah, I didn't know that they had ratted on the Aryan Brotherhood. That would be, not a very smart thing to do.
It's rumored. I mean, I'm familiar with that theory. It's rumored,
Okay, so weren't they saying that Koberger bought this K-bar, but he bought it through somebody else? Like he didn't buy it directly on Amazon himself? It's just something that I thought I saw earlier.
Yeah, it's my understanding that he bought it on a family account.
Oh, okay, that's what it was.
Yeah.
All right, so Heather was saying that this Cole Randall guy, his name came up in a court document from DNA testing. Now, there was a report that one of the girls, and I forget which one, had DNA from 3 other people underneath her fingernails.
Madison Mogan, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those people were not identified.
Correct. Along with the blood on the hand railing, the bloody glove out front.
Right, but none of that DNA that was under her fingernails was Koberger's either.
Well, they're playing games with that, but you are correct, sir.
Yeah. Because it seems if it was, that would be plastered all over the news. This Koberger thing is on the news every couple of days now up here in New England. So,
for sure.
All right, so this what Heather's saying through the DNA testing in the court documents where this guy's name's coming up. That's very interesting to me. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more. I see. Looks like Teresa has entered the chat. Hello, Teresa. And so, yeah, there was another point I wanted to make. Oh, I'm getting tired.
Well, let me take you down a trip down memory lane there before you fall asleep. I'm here. We'll get you a nice little nursery bedtime here, rhyme of the time that the Moscow PD decided to do a magic trick when they had no suspects and asking the world for help. They're like, hey, let's go look at this abandoned Hyundai in Oregon. We're not even sure if it's a Hyundai, may or may not be a Hyundai, but let's go look at this abandoned Hyundai in Oregon. Maybe that's our suspect. We'll talk about that in front of the podium too. Another unfounded conspiracy theory. I point these things out because these are the weeks preceding what I claim was a ruse, and that was the interwebs conspiracy theorists and crime buffs can't be asking questions and searching about our case anymore. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble. This TikTok lady who's reading tarot cards is getting sued by the University of Idaho president. You guys better not. You know what I mean? These were the weeks preceding that. They're the ones who started the fucking conspiracy theory games from the podium of the fucking press conferences, talking about complete nonsense when they had no clue publicly about their investigation. Now, privately, I'm quite positive they had a clue, and they knew the fix was in the entire time, in my opinion, on Koberger. But publicly, they're like, we don't have a clue, but check this out. There's an abandoned car, 500 miles from here. We should go look at that. Get the fuck out of here, right? And then they start perpetrating the whole narrative of you better not ask any questions or you're going to get sued, right? Y'all remember those?
So what was the motive to go look at an abandoned Hyundai that was 500 miles away?
Right. Because it was white and the interwebs was talking about it, right? So I'm saying that why address it publicly from the podium from law enforcement? It's no purpose. And again, they immediately flip their tune immediately after that and start saying, well, we're not only should you all not read these things either. You guys shouldn't read any question, ask any questions, shouldn't read anything into this, right? So it was to me, it was an effort looking at it, the the before and after effects of what went on there. They intentionally started inserting unfounded conspiracy theories into their own investigation from the podium, and then immediately turned around and said, "You conspiracy theorists better not, or you're going to get sued."
There is so many people on this case. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, we're just like lay people, right? And you go on YouTube or whatever, TikTok. There's some really people with really big accounts looking into this case. You know, this is going to be pissing off the prosecution and the police department, because even the stuff that we make them look bad. Like they could actually come and say that we are tainting the jury pool because we're discerning all this information. I mean, information that's out there, like we're not making any of this stuff up. Like, we're just taking this information that is available from multiple sources, and then we're just asking the what ifs and the whys. And they don't like that, right? So now, like you say, now they get up on the podium and they're entering in conspiracy theorists, or conspiracy theory, excuse me. But then they warn us, all of us conspiracy theorists, they're warning us not to say anything or get involved, or we're going to get sued. It's like, buddy,
Exactly.
which one is it? Which one is
Exactly.
it? Are you going to be pushing the conspiracy, or are you listening to? Are you starting to believe what we're actually questioning now? I don't know. It's just kind of, the whole thing's turning into a shit show circus, and it's kind of funny to watch. The only thing is if Kohberger isn't guilty,
Ronnie is not there.
If right, but what I'm saying is, do you think Kohberger has access to any of this information that any of us are saying? Or do you think he's isolated away from that?
I suspect he does.
Because he's probably sitting back, oh my God, guys, keep it up. Because you're sowing so much, sowing the seeds of doubt here.
Because all these things we're talking about tonight with these communications and text messages and Snapchats and et cetera, he's known about this stuff for a long time. So is his counsel. It's just been under
You got to
seal.
put that in the show notes, JJ. The people listening, they got to look at this timeline of these text messages. It's crazy. These people were glued to their phone for hours and hours and hours, and then they don't make a 911 call till 11:56 the next morning.
Well, Ron, Idaho police don't understand how roommates slept through gruesome murders. Are you trying to tell me they did not sleep through the gruesome murders? Is that what you're trying to tell me, Ron?
Yeah, nobody was asleep in that house. You're not going to convince me that. And if they're doing drugs, they're definitely not sleeping. They're going to be up and they're going to be wired. And they probably didn't want to call because they didn't want anybody to show up and find massive amounts of drugs in the house. I don't know.
I'm sure that was an aspect. I'm sure that was an aspect of it.
Nobody knows what your mindset's going to be if 4 people just got murdered in the same house you're living in. I mean, we don't know. None of us have been through that. But I think that I would be calling 911 a lot quicker. I mean, let's say that the murders happened around 4 o'clock. Let's just say 4:15 or 4:20, right? Was kind of the guess.
4:20 indeed. Let's go.
Yeah, so 4:20 till noontime the next day. That's a lot of time. Like, that's a big block of time for nothing to be going on.
Well, sadly, law enforcement didn't read their own reports because they're puzzled on what the roommates were doing during that time, according to media reports.
Tom Campbell in the chat is 100% on. He said, in the smell of the blood alone. So let me tell you something. I have had to go on record calls for fatal car accidents. They have their own smell. Not the dead body smell, but when somebody dies and there's blood involved, it is a very unique smell, and once you smell it, you'll never forget it. And that house had to be, he's spot on this. They're in this house. That house had to have the smell of
poop.
And I'm starting to gag just thinking about it. the
bowels will also discharge during that time, Ron, right? Not just the blood, right?
Yes, but there's something about the way that blood smells. Like when you pick a car up off the scene and somebody has died in it. Of course, you're waiting a long time because in New Hampshire, you're not allowed to move the vehicle until the coroner comes or the medical examiner declares the body dead. Then they got to take the body. Then they release the car. So, and one time we had to do one, and the cops had us. They said, "We need you to impound this vehicle inside of your garage tonight." Because in New Hampshire, in a fatality, they impound a vehicle. But back then, it was a little different. So they wanted us to impound it and keep the vehicle safe for the investigation overnight. So the car was on top of our car carrier. So we drove the whole car carrier into the shop and locked the shop down. And let me tell you what, the next day, nasty.
Little DIY evidence locker, huh?
Yeah, it was bad. Like I can still smell it right now. I mean, it just brings you right back.
Oh, I agree with you, Ron. I'm familiar with these unfortunate circumstances that you discuss. So, Nick, I think this is a good one for something I know you're interested in. Where was all the blood in 1122?
You won't know now,
right? But like, do y'all ever remember seeing any of the evidence? I mean, we were told like that little bit, on the side of the house was blood. I've never been convinced of that necessarily, but
and one
those people were killed the way they said they were. Man, that place was going to be
oh my god, it would be
bloodbath. Literally,
it would look like a massacre there.
Especially you wait 8 hours, those bodies are probably drained.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. That's what I'm saying. Where is any of the evidence of these activities, right? So this filing back on the Frank's filing here back in February 19th, it discusses Murphy the dog being not only confirmed to be outside at a time after the car goes away. It's allegedly the suspects, right? There's this barking and stuff, and that allegedly by police investigation they determined the dog was outside. The sliding glass door was apparently left open, the one that allegedly DM saw the Koberger walk out, and the bedroom doors up, at least on the third floor. They're not clear about the second floor. They're real cagey about that one. The third floor, confirmed in the same document, is that the doors were open. So when the law enforcement arrives, at least allegedly, in the first evidence of Officer Nunez, despite not knowing precisely when he showed up, along with Smith or Gunderson or Lanier or the 4 rookie cops. Nunez's body camera shows that the Murphy's in Kaylee's bedroom when the door's open. And the door's open allegedly to Madison Mogan's bedroom on the third floor where the bodies are at. And the dog has no blood on it, right? So where is the blood, right? Why is the dog not in there with its owner? Why does it have no blood on it?
Covered in blood. Covered in blood.
Yeah. For sure. So where is the blood?
The blood got cleaned up. The blood got cleaned up. You know what they did? They attempted to clean this scene up and make this scene go away. And then something happened and they had to abandon that. And that's why they waited till noontime to call 911.
Strong theory. I've considered that myself. They needed a Winston the Wolf is what you're saying.
I mean, you mean to tell me there's only one bloody footprint in this whole freaking house?
Not even bloody.
When four people are knifed to death? And unless you knife them directly in the heart and stop the heart, if you knife somebody or somebody gets shot away from the heart's going to keep pumping. You are going to pump out blood, and it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be everywhere.
Yeah, what is the dog?
What is it?
And that house had a dog too.
Murphy the dog. You want to see a picture? I think I have one here somewhere. I got a whole bunch of pictures. But yeah, I mean, how is that believable, right? This dog, its owner's, allegedly dead in the other room. The doors are open and it never goes in there to get blood on itself. It's there's evidence indicating it had gone downstairs to the second floor in and out of the sliding glass door that was allegedly left open. So according to this document, right? So it's traversing the home. It didn't run into any of the blood downstairs, didn't encounter Xander Kernodle, which according to reports is allegedly in the hallway, but bled out and died there in the hallway, in the little hallway to her bedroom there. Meanwhile, the 911 call exhibits no one indicating any sign of blood. They're acting like she just can't breathe. These dynamics don't make sense. I like to say schizo in, schizo out. If you read their schizo ass reports, you're going to get a lot of schizo ass fucking conclusions because it's all fucking nonsense.
Yeah, like in the 911 call, they're like, didn't they try to, they were talking about defibbing her with a defib.
Precisely.
Okay, so
and they went from defib to homicide in 7 seconds, right? It was defib, and then the officer calls in, we got ourselves a homicide.
Yeah, you're going to defib somebody that's laying there that's bled out? Come on.
Right.
Yo, what's
do mouth to mouth on this person?
What's the point?
Dude, this case gets funkier. Every episode we do on it gets funkier. And you know what? And of course, we're not done with it, right? I mean, we're going to keep going. So that's, yeah. None of this makes sense.
Sure.
I mean, if this girl was killed at 4:20 in the morning, they make the 911 call at 11:56. Probably takes 5 or 10 minutes for the cops to get there, EMS to get there. So now you're talking 12:15, 12:20, and they think, oh, it looks, is she sleeping? Yeah, she's just sleeping. Let's defib her as a joke, right? Let's try to defib her, zap her back into life. It's just none of that. And none of this, even like the small, just like the small facts like that. Like it was a big deal when this 911 call came out. And they're all passing the phone back and forth to each other. The 911 lady's like, okay, stop doing that. I need you to stop doing that. I need to speak to one person, and they're all freaking out. And they're talking like the perp is still there.
Right.
There was some sentences that they said that made me believe it's like, are they trying to make everybody believe that the perp is still there?
They were trying to make everybody believe, in my opinion, that not to believe anything because it was the object of whatever was going on there was confusion. Now, whether or not that was recorded in real time or whether or not the details surrounding that, or I couldn't tell you. The veracity of that release is unofficial, right? So the authorities can officially say we didn't do it. Whitcomb 911 released it. I mean, while technically they are part of the authorities, there's a gag order on this case. So, why the fuck is that getting released?
So is there still a gag order?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So how does any government entity release that, right?
Yeah.
Idaho press conference sparks new wild new theory about college murders, right? Sorry, Ron. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say, if there's a gag order on this and a gag order on evidence, this 911 call would not have been released, period.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I question the veracity of it, right?
It'd be a violation of the gag order. And not only that, but I can take all kinds of stuff and put it in Audacity and make it sound like anything you want. You guys know what I'm talking about.
You don't have the audacity to do that, Ron.
I could do some cool stuff in Audacity.
Audacity.
That's what I'm saying. This can be pieced together. Who knows? You know what I mean? Who knows the veracity and validity of it because it's unofficial, right? Again, it's skirting the gag order, right? And everyone's like, hey, it wasn't us. We didn't do it. But media's running with it, right? Like you're saying, media's running with it. It's feeding into the narratives, despite it conflicting the previous narratives. That no one's objectively analyzing that in the media to that regard. They're just, this is frightening. This is disturbing. Well, this is that article I was saying. Again, back to November, Idaho press conference sparks wild new theory about college murders. They're the ones who fucking did. The authorities are the one that did it. They're like, hey, you guys better not do that. When after they did it, like you guys better not. And again, that was that whole TikToker professor business.
Don't you guys? Isn't it crazy that this is over 2 years old already?
Right, almost 2.5. Right, shit, we're moving on 2.5.
In May, it'll be 2.5 in May. Yeah. Well, the end of May, actually, almost Memorial Day weekend, it'll be 2.5 years old.
For sure.
And nobody still knows anything other than the stuff that podcasters and YouTubers come up with. Yeah, I don't know. Have they built a new house on this site yet?
Ron, what's that?
I said, have they built a new house on this site yet?
They put a park there. It's just a grassy area.
Grassy.
Ron,
no.
we don't even know the dynamic or the officers who responded were fed narratives through various avenues that tell us things. Again, early media reports, Lanier and 4 rookie officers. Then on January 6th or 7th, I believe it was, when Koberger was extradited to Idaho and the affidavits of arrest were released, then it's, Officer Smith and quote unquote other officers, and then Howard Bloom writes a book, and you got this Gunderson fella he's a fucking hero. And let's look at that while we're on that topic. Let's look at old Ted Gunderson here. It's not Ted. I don't know what his first name is, but he just got appointed to the FBI Academy class, right? So a couple hundred slots a year the FBI gives to civilian and other federal agency law enforcement to send somebody to their academy. The current police chief of Moscow PD, Blaker, he's also a grad of the FBI Academy a few years ago. He was the first detective on scene with old Brett Payne there. Despite outranking Brett Payne became the lead, and now Blaker's the chief of police. But on the topic of Gunderson here, if you look here from 2021, Moscow PD buries evidence in sticker case for more than a year. That's Gunderson. They have a real problem with discovery and hiding evidence in that town, apparently. And old Ted Gunderson, or whatever the hell his name is, first name, he's involved in all that nonsense back. This is, again, preceding the murders, right?
Yeah, it gets more interesting. I like this Aryan Brotherhood angle. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Well, there's definitely a lot of Aryan Brotherhood drug dealing. There's a significant amount of Sonoma drug cartel, including leaders getting popped in the last 6 months and 12 months in and around the Idaho and Pullman region. So there's a lot of drug activity going somewhere in all that drug activity. The Aryans and the Sonolas are meeting. You know what I mean, Ron? They're intersecting somewhere up there, whether it's a turf war or some sort of agreement.
Well, you remember, like, if you look at a map, Mexico, Texas to Salt Lake City is kind of a straight shot. And we know that from Salt Lake up to
I-15.
Moscow, is a straight shot. And then that's a known drug corridor.
Yeah, also coming down through Sandpoint, Idaho, Aryan capital headquarters, where a number of the victims are from. And then coming down through there to Coeur d'Alene, that gets you over to that Coeur d'Alene Spokane intersection is important because it goes south there to Moscow, but it heads over to Seattle. So that's a big interchange, drug-wise, drug pipelines.
My dog's getting ready to chase after my cat.
So I appreciate the conversation here, gents, on some of these topics. We'll be bringing it here to a close for you. I'd like to get your thoughts on a couple more items here real quick and close it out. One of which, and then a couple photos here. But neighbors to U of I homicides tells of party culture around home, unusually quiet night. Why do you suppose no one was partying at that house that night?
Well, something was planned to happen there.
They had special guests coming over that night.
You mean Nick? You think they were expecting somebody?
Yeah, they probably knew what was going on.
So they had someone on the inside, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it, someone had to deter folks from coming to that home, right? Or it's very commonplace for folks to come in and out of that place, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe I don't know about deterring everybody, but I was gonna say maybe it wasn't a place that you actually had to be known to have a reason to go there. You could just show up. Maybe the cops' presence. I don't know.
But
that's
I think that was the case,
right?
Though.
That was the culture, right?
I think that was the case because there was lots of parties where people. Remember where they went there to question people for a noise complaint, and there was 2 kids there that didn't live there. And
people weren't even there, man.
Yeah, do you know the people that live here? No. Are they here? No. Well, what are you doing here? Oh no, people just come here. We party here. Remember that when the cops were interviewing those 2 kids?
Right.
Yeah. So Desert Rain in the chat has a good point too. The Mormon Mafia in Idaho. Obviously, we know the Mormon Mafia in Salt Lake, right?
Well, I mean, she brings up a good point. So someone wrote me a message about a couple weeks ago on this case, talking about some connection to possibly Colonel Paul Tate, the father of Sharon Tate, one of the victims of the Manson murders.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the early reports in the tabloids, in the Globe tabloid out of the UK, was they had an investigator, their own investigator. They were quoting saying this was a Manson cult style murder, at the University of Idaho. Right, this was printed on December 28th, and you could write that off as it's a tabloid and that's nonsense, and I'm willing to do that as well. However, what's interesting is Scott Green, he wrote a book about how he handled this like a fucking champ, the whole thing as the university president, and he wrote a book saying that he's the one who got that removed from the media. Well, why the fuck are you even putting that in your book? Who would have even known about it? He's the one. It's like the Streisand effect. He's bringing attention to it. If there's any validity to it, I don't know. But so the individual the person was writing me about saying it's this Detective Gooch. So she's an ISP DNA detective, forensic lady. She came out of retirement to work this case. And as the court releases have been happening since January, it's becoming more and more evident she's deeply involved in the whole thing. So it's not just mainly the FBI driving the DNA stuff in the investigation, but as far as Idaho is concerned, this Detective Gooch is she's the woman on the ground, so to speak. And it's interesting she came out of retirement, but nonetheless, her husband is the Gooch, and he's from a long line of Gooches, and they're a Mormon pioneer family, right? So it's interesting. Desert Rain makes some interesting points because who else is a Mormon pioneer family? The Mortensons. In fact, the Gooches and the Mortensons appear to have possibly crossed paths back in Nebraska, but that's a different story altogether. I'm just painting a picture of how close these Mormon pioneer families appear to.
Don't all the Mormons cross each other's paths eventually?
Well, when you're talking Mormon pioneer folks and they're in the same place at the same time, and they're and I'm not saying it could be sheer happenstance that these individuals are associated with this case, one being a surviving roommate, one being a detective. But what I'm saying is it's interesting that the prominent roles these families still hold out there in that region.
Oh, yeah. My point was back when they were, because, they outlawed polygamy, allegedly, which I don't believe is true. But back when the polygamy was the thing with the Mormons, that's why I said all of them families knew each other.
Well, there may be something to that for sure.
All so, right, well, that was fun.
What I was gonna say, what kind of closing remarks can you folks here offer? You gents offer here to the folks of the interwebs? Any thoughts on the case or any of the topics we've discussed this evening?
I still think the whole thing with the bodies in the house being gone is like some crazy, wild shit. I know that sounds like one of the simpler things, but to me, it's just like, what's the proof? What happened? Yeah,
it's so simple, Nick. It's right in front of your eyes, and nobody's even thinking about that, right?
Yeah, and even all those time discrepancies. I don't trust that, and I don't trust that lady Mabutt. I know it's not that's the right reason to do it, but she's part of the Lions Club, and I do think they're involved with other crimes. Possibly, my theory. People in those organizations might be.
Well, I think it's pretty handy that she's the coroner. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, did you have anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you, sir.
Are we signing out?
That's you got any closing remarks for us, Ron? Any words of wisdom on the case or anything we discussed here?
I got some closing remarks on this for sure. I think we need to look into something that people are getting away from, and we were kind of heavy on it before, and we need to get back into it. The drug activity in these sororities and these fraternities, the drug pipeline from Salt Lake to Moscow, Idaho. Now that they've brought in the Mormon Mafia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the mother and the stepmother involvement with drug cases and making deals with the feds, all of this, that has something to do with this. The Fed involvement, the federal grand jury involvement. This is all, it's on the peripheral now because everybody's focusing just on Koberger right now. To get a better bird's eye view of this, or as Alex Jones would say, okay, we're going to give you the 35,000 foot view. You got to go out, you got to buy my colonial silver. And I'm telling you, you help fund the show. Even if the stuff doesn't work, you're helping us survive. The globalists are trying to take us over. If you look from that high and look out further, like spread this baby out, like this might not be just Idaho and Washington, right? This could be Idaho, Washington, Colorado, freaking Utah, Wyoming. I mean, this could all be part of a much bigger picture. And Kohberger's he's the Lee Harvey Oswald of the whole deal, you know? So, I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald, he had some involvement in the JFK killing, but he wasn't the only one that did it, right? And this is how I feel about Kohberger. So, anyways.
Solid points, Ron. Solid points. I appreciate that. And in regards to your statements, in regards to learning more about the drug trafficking, the money laundering, the crypto, I highly recommend, folks. It's a good plug. In your statement's a good plug for my show I did a couple weeks ago here last week on Operation GCD, drug, sex, and crypto, parapolitics, and the Idaho 4 case. So I strongly recommend folks check that out. And on that note, when we close this out here, what are you gents working on here on the Wicked Planet and the Occult Rejects?
You want to go first, Nick?
No, I can't even think of anything. I might actually start working on my Nashville documentary.
Nick, you got shows come out every day. You like to do?
Oh, I could promote one of those. Yeah, but I'm not working.
He's not busy. He's always pumping shows out, right, Ron?
Yeah. Yeah, he's down in the sunshine now. He's not up in the Northeast like me, freezing my balls off. Even though it's been nice, the weather's starting to get nicer. It was like in the 50s today. The snow's gone, other than the snowbanks. But on Wicked Planet, I'm trying to get back into the groove of things. I took about a month off. I did a show last week. Did a show with Kristen, and I had a guest on. Guy's name was Bradley Freedom. He runs the freedompeople.org. Anyways, had him on to talk about the five pillars of freedom. That was kind of interesting. But Kristen came on and to talk about her experience she had going to the Gnostic Mass down in Salem, Massachusetts. You know, which town? She went to the OTO building down there and went to a Gnostic Mass and actually did Gnostic communion.
Oh,
which I was pretty surprised she did that.
Anyway, like that.
Yeah, and the cake of light, exactly. And then we talked a little bit more about the Mothers of Darkness Castle, which is something that Kristen's really into. So that episode just literally came out this afternoon. So go look for Wicked Planet anywhere, Spotify, Apple, everywhere. Just go check out the episodes. If you like it, leave us some comments, hit the follow button, and support the show. You're still getting it for free. So I'm still not making any money on it, but it is what it is. Get out there and listen to it. And I'm glad you invited me. I got your links
in the show notes there, Ron. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks for inviting me on this episode was a little overdue. We'll have to do another one once we get a little bit more information that's coming around. And I want to thank everybody in the chats. We had a lot of people in the chat tonight.
For sure. Thank you, Ron. I appreciate the conversation. For sure. Nick, as always.
Anytime, JJ.
My back, did I cut out?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, I'm back. I'm back. All right.
You froze up for a couple seconds. Yeah.
No, I appreciate. I enjoyed the chat as well here this evening. I appreciate your time, Ron, and as always, Nick, I appreciate your time. It was a great conversation. We'll definitely be linking up again in the future, I'm sure, for another Idaho 4 discussion as this boondoggle continues.
Sounds good.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, but check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.